I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guests today are Lyla Johnston and Tanaya Winder. Lyla June is an Indigenous public speaker, artist, scholar, and community organizer of Dene, Cheyenne, and European lineages from Taos, New Mexico. Her messages focus on Indigenous rights, supporting youth, traditional land stewardship practices, and healing intergenerational and intercultural trauma. She blends undergraduate studies in human ecology at Stanford University, graduate work in Native American pedagogy at the University of New Mexico, and the Indigenous worldview she grew up with to inform her perspectives and solutions. Her internationally acclaimed presentations are conveyed through the medium of poetry, music, and/or speech. She is currently pursuing a doctoral degree at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in Indigenous Studies with a focus on Indigenous food systems revitalization. She has 2 new songs out, North Star featuring Quincy Davis and Water is Life featuring Oliver and Jody. They are streaming on all platforms now, and links to the music videos are in the text accompanying this episode. All Bandcamp sales for these songs benefit 7th Generation Fund, dedicated to Indigenous peoples' self-determination and the sovereignty of Native nations. You can visit her Bandcamp at lylajune.bandcamp.com, visit her website lylajune.com, and follow her at Instagram at lylajune. That's LYLAJUNE. Tanaya Winder is a poet, writer, artist, and educator who was raised on the Southern Ute Reservation in Ignacio, Colorado. An enrolled member of the Duckwater Shoshone tribe, her background includes Southern Ute, Pyramid Lake Paiute, Dene, and Black heritages. Tanaya writes and teaches about different expressions of love, self-love, intimate love, social love, community love, and universal love. She is the director of the University of Colorado Boulder's Upward Bound program. During her 10 years there, she has served hundreds of Indigenous youth. She teaches as an adjunct professor at the University of New Mexico. Tanaya believes everyone has a gift they've been placed on this earth to share. Her specialties include youth and women empowerment, healing trauma through art, creative writing workshops, and mental wellness advocacy. Tanaya created Dream Warriors Management, a collective of Indigenous artists who believe in pursuing passions, dreams, and gifts to better loved ones and communities, while also uplifting others. Each artist travels to perform concerts, run workshops, teach empowerment and artistic skill sets, showcase his, her, or their performance art and artistry, and speak at various engagements throughout the country. Together, they've developed the Dream Warriors Scholarship. See more at the website dreamwarriors.co. Join Tanaya for her Ignite Your Fire tour. Tour dates span the month of October and into November with both online and in-person events, culminating in the 8th Annual Native Alliance Leadership Summit on November 6th. For more, visit her website, tanayawinder.com, as well as follow her on Instagram at Tanaya Winder. That's TANAYAWINDER. She also has a Patreon, patreon.com/Tanaya. You can also check out her TED Talk, presented at TEDx Albuquerque 2013, Igniting Healing, a powerful talk on the power of poetry and creativity. Links to all of these sites can be found in the text accompanying this episode. As with all Rendering Unconscious podcast episodes, there is a video accompanying this episode at YouTube. Just visit Trapart Film's YouTube channel. That's TRAPART Film at YouTube, or search for Rendering Unconscious podcast. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. You can visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org, for links and more information. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at rawsin_. That's RAWSIN_. Rendering Unconscious is also a book, Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry, from Trapart Books 2019. For more information, you can visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast at our Patreon, patreon.com/Vanessa23Carl. That's VANESSA23CARL. Your support is very appreciated. Thank you so much for supporting Rendering Unconscious podcast and all of my other creative endeavors.
Well, Lyla June. Greetings, my kin and my people. My name is Lyla June. I'm from the Nanisht Ejitachitni clan of the Dene Nation, or also incorrectly known as Navajo. My father's mothers of the Southern Cheyenne clan. And in that manner, I present myself as a Dene woman. Because we get our main identities from our mother line. So that's my main clan is from my mother. And I think Tanaya and I were talking about this podcast and thinking about, some of the psychological effects that Indigenous peoples feel each and every day from the wake of colonization and the process of colonization on this land that has been going on for about 500 years. And Tanaya and I'll let her speak for herself, but she and I get to work together all the time to help Native youth who are maybe feeling lost, maybe don't have a firm identity, maybe are having suicide ideation, maybe are having problems at home, or are themselves into substances and mind-altering substances. And I was that Native youth who was having all those issues, and so we really try to be on the ground to help them. Many different tribes over the past decade or two have issued states of emergency because the youth suicide rate was so high. They would lose 5 kids in a month, 10 kids in a month. There was packed suicide, so kids would go together. And it has been really heartbreaking for our communities. And so I think that's sort of the big picture of what we want to talk about, is the the larger patterns of colonization that give rise to these conditions. A lot of Indigenous peoples are, not doing so well. Sometimes people think, oh, we get a casino check and we're all good. And but I've never seen a casino check in my life. And the average household income for my nation is $20,000 for the entire household. That's the median income for the Dene Nation. And we're actually one of the more well-off nations to some degree. There's a spectrum, but so we have an intense situation of poverty. 20,000 a year for the whole house is not very much. And many of my people make much less than that. Indigenous women are the most likely demographic to be raped, beaten, or stalked in their lifetimes. And so then that begs the question, why are we in this situation? Why are we as Indigenous peoples faced with so many obstacles? And I won't get into it too deep, but this should answer the question fairly quickly. Is just 100 and some years ago, it was legal to hunt Native people in California, and you would actually get paid for it. You could get paid for every person. And so there was mercenary and bounty hunting. So just a little over 100 years ago, that was completely normal and even codified into United States law. And so the idea that we are human, that Indigenous peoples are human in the eyes of American society, is a relatively recent thing. So for this reason, and way more reasons that I won't get into because it's already kind of a deep conversation, but suffice it to say, we've been through a lot, and we're actually not supposed to be here. The policy was extermination, and yet we're here. And so we're dealing with the after effects of that. So I think we as a nation can really do a lot, and I can get into more of that later. No matter who we are, no matter what skin color we have, whatever language we speak, we all have a profound ability in this country to turn this situation around for the Indigenous peoples of this land, for the original stewards of this land, for the original caretakers of this land, so that Native peoples no longer feel like outcasts in their own home. There's a lot that we as a nation can do to start bringing healing into these communities. There's a lot that's already being done, in fact. And there's a lot that each and every one of us can do in our prayers to keep Native people in mind and think of the ways in which we are benefiting from the displacement and dispossession of Indigenous peoples and how that has psychological effects on those communities. So I don't know, Tanaya, do you want to speak to sort of like what you do on the ground to address these issues or anything else?
Sure. Yeah, and just so my community, Tanaya Winder. My name's Tanaya Winder. I'm a citizen of the Duckwater Shoshone Nation. I'm also Pyramid Lake Paiute, Southern Ute, Dene, and Black. And I grew up on the Southern Ute Reservation where my father's from. And just to emphasize and highlight some of what Lyla was saying, even just only last month was official language overturned in Colorado. One of the former governors, John Evans, had 2 orders, and one of them was calling for citizens to kill and destroy Indigenous people who are deemed hostile. And that legislation was used to start Sand Creek Massacre. And that language was never officially revoked, even after Colorado achieved statehood. So 157 years later, only last month was that language changed. So it was still technically legal to kill Indigenous people in Colorado up until last month. And, for me, just thinking about the power of actions, but the power of words, my mom always speaks of words being like seeds, and you have to be careful of the things you say, the seeds you plant, the words you say about others and yourself, because you give life to it in that way. And words, in these legislation, those harmful things, words that called us savage and hostile, and as Lyla was saying, deemed us not even human. I think all of that impacts, those soul wounds have continued until today. And it wasn't until I started working with Indigenous youth for one of my jobs. My job was to help them get into college to increase like post-secondary enrollment. And the language of these federal grants, it's just so much around like, colonialism, like good grades, like as high SAT scores, like all these things. And the longer I did it, I was just like, there's this whole other component missing around like spiritual health, emotional health, mental health, and how all of those things tie into a person's quote unquote success. So it just seemed like this missing piece, and for me, youth, they're always that beacon, that like indicator. I wish I could think of a better metaphor because I don't like coal mines, but like the canary in the coal mines, like if the canaries died, like that was the warning to the miners that the air wasn't good, the situation wasn't good, it was deadly. And I think when so many of our youth are taking their lives or dying from different substance abuse and things like that, like that's our canary, like that's showing us like something is wrong with this world, which we've all known. And so then the next step was do something. So for me, like Lyla, struggling a lot in my youth with substance abuse, with anxiety that I think comes from that historical and personal trauma as well. Like that's something like on the lower end, I think people live with anxiety all the way up to the things like depression and other things that need healing. But for me, poetry, writing, music, like those were the things that grounded me. Like that was my medicine, that was my therapy. And so, I found a group of artists, a group of friends, family, who I believed, were similar, like warriors in that way. Like each of them had survived and like carried these scars and stories of survival that I thought, wow, like if this student heard Lyla, I know they would get like the inspiration they need. Or if this student heard Tall Paul, or if this student heard Jordan, or if this student heard Frank, like just all of the people that we work with. And I thought, how can I assemble like relatives to come together so we visit communities and tell our stories of survival, because that's how a lot of our history, a lot of our lessons are passed down through these stories. Like storying is sacred, storying is our medicine. Like if you go visit elders and you want to learn about something, you'll often get a story, and there's so much in that story, so many lessons, like things you can pull out. And so for me, that was the key. Like that was providing that triage. Lyla and I were talking earlier, like we're the first on the scene sometimes, like doing that triage and just doing what we can to offer help. And then the students and the youth and community, they have all the other resources, like their school, their families, their aunties and grandmas and people that help. Because for us, healing and working on your wellness, it's communal. It's never an individual process.
Well, thank you both so much for being here. And I think that was a really important place to begin. And not only is this such recent history that these things have happened, but it's still ongoing. And I think that's a really important point to make for people to continue to realize and to keep in the forefront. And I often think about like the whole situation at the border between Texas and Mexico. It's like a false border, how it's divided, peoples and nations, and a lot of the people that are getting held there are actually indigenous people that are migrating upwards into the quote unquote United States. And yeah, just how tragic that is.
Yeah, a lot of our communities have been split in half by that border because we're actually predating that border. And yeah, just to also put in context, when I was a freshman in college, Tanaya was my RA at Stanford University, and she was doing creative writing and I was doing anthropology. And she was, even back then, really working hard to be a good mentor to the Native youth, the incoming freshmen such as myself. I think you were a junior or a senior then?
Senior,
yeah. So I was a first year senior. So And then, who would know that, 8 years later or whatever it was, we would be, working together to, and then Tanaya founded this beautiful management company called the Dream Warriors. And those warriors that she speaks of, there's 7 of us, and we're a musician collective, and we get to go around and do our therapy for our people, which comes in the form of music and story. And yeah, there's the bigger root of the issue, like Tanaya said, even the fact that in the US Constitution still today, Native people are called merciless Indian savages. Which I laugh, but it's incredibly tragic that to this day in the US Constitution, that's how our people are referred to. And how ironic, right? Because how merciless has the government been to us? Like, how many people of our nations have been massacred? How many times has the BIA, starved us? How many times have we been put into concentration camps, etc., on our own homelands, And so there's those bigger pictures of like why we're in this situation, and then there's the paramedics like us, the dream warriors on the ground, trying to treat the symptoms, trying to treat the symptoms of colonization, the ways in which our youth are sort of invisible in this country, and the ways in which they are taught to see themselves, even in our own public schools on the reservations or tribal BIA schools, the history books are not complete. Sometimes we have to struggle for cultural education in our own schools. Language immersion is very rare, and of the 250 some indigenous languages that are spoken in the US and Canada, I recently read that only about 30 of them are being spoken by the children. And so the rest are sort of on their way out if the children don't learn. And so, there's the bigger picture of like how the US, conceives of us, or sometimes doesn't even think of us at all. It was sort of an afterthought. But then on the ground, really taking care of the youth the best that we can, and, being independent to the extent that we can. And even if the world doesn't recognize us or doesn't uplift us or continues to berate us, at least we can get together and support one another through these workshops, which we have a big one next week in the Four Corners area. But yeah, so just a little context of how the Dream Warriors started and what we do.
Yeah, so what is this event that you have coming up? I also saw that you have a new album out.
Yeah, I'll talk about the event, and Lyla can talk about her album. It's so exciting. For a couple years now, we've been working with the Southern Ute community and the Ute Mountain Ute community in Southern Colorado. And one of the things that we like to do as an artist collective is to return to communities and schools as often as we can. I know in research, sometimes they call it like helicopter research, where you just like keep that bird's eye view and just like use the community for your purposes and you never come back. And we don't want to do that as artists. Like it's about, and as Indigenous people, it's about building and maintaining relationships. And so for us, we're really lucky that some of the communities and schools do appreciate that and bring us back as often as they can. In this community, we work with the KSUT tribal radio station, and they have a grant through the Colorado Health Foundation. And so we got to go a couple years ago and just, perform and tell our stories. But the best part is like teaching those skills, just leaving those tools that helped us, those tools that helped liberate us, like leaving those with the youth and community as well, so they can use it for their own expression or however they want to use those things. So we went and we made a song with them. Like we did a little video. We taught them about writing and performing and memorize. Like there's just everything that goes into making a song and performing. We try to teach, and it went really well. And then, the next year we were supposed to do it in person with the Ute Mountain Ute community in Toyac, Colorado. But because of COVID, we weren't able to do that, but we pivoted. We did an online beats and braids program where we worked with youth like through Zoom to just try to teach as well. And now it's going to be our first time coming all together since the pandemic, and to get to do workshops. And so we're going to get to visit with the schools. We're going to get to go to the Ute Mountain Ute community, and then we're going to get to work with elders as well and just hear their stories and do a poetry writing workshop with them. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to work with the youth and, like I said, apply our type of therapy to the kids, because I think Tanaya and I both, writing and music saved our lives, perhaps definitely saved mine. I remember being in the lowest point of my life ever when I was in the 8th grade. And that's when I discovered slam poetry. And that's when everything changed pretty much. I had a life all of a sudden. I had an outlet, I had an identity, I had self-esteem. So we try to give these young people something similar, and also model to them what it looks like to be an artist. And so, yeah, one of the, I didn't have an album come out, but I had a single come out called The North Star. And it's on all the streaming platforms and stuff. It's my first sort of like electronic pop type of song, trying to reach like more young people. And it's a song about just being completely lost and not knowing where to go, and asking creator for help. Like some people call it Allah or God, or different words for the divine, but sometimes some nations call it creator. So it starts off saying, oh, my creator, helper of my soul, walk with me on this road, because I can't do it on my own. And it's just an invocation song asking creator to be with me, and something that maybe people could sing along to and remember to ask creator to come into their lives. And yeah, I know one really amazing, you probably know her, therapist, Margaret Paul. She wrote a book called The Inner Bonding Workbook. And she started out as a licensed psychologist, therapist, and she realized that there was some holes in the methodology, and that connection to a divine higher power, as she calls it, is part and parcel to healing. And so she just comes out with it. She's pretty unashamed about saying, we need creator if we're going to heal fully. And I think that goes back to what Tanaya was saying of how, our therapy that we need in Native communities definitely involves our ceremony, our songs, our, people call them rituals, but they're actually kind of more like ceremonies. They're very gentle, very beautiful, very carefully done, and they have all these teachings encoded within them and embedded within them. And so I think a lot of what Dream Warriors does is we try to bring prayer to the youth too. So in the songs that a lot of us write, we reference creator, and we reference that spirituality, so that the young people could just remember that that's who we are as Native people. We're people of great faith, and we're people who really believe in the spirits and the ancestors and the creator and the different guides that help us through. So that's kind of what the song is about.
Yeah, and usually I'm also an artist, and I make a little bit of music. Well, I do vocals mostly, and my husband sets it to music. But I usually, because of that, put a song at the end of every episode, because I think psychology has a lot of holes, and I found a lot more use in creativity and making art, and that's really like helped me the most in those processes. So I try to kind of imbue things with that as well. So if you have that song or another song or something that you would like to share and have me put at the end, I would love to do that if you have one you'd like to share.
I'm sure we could find something too, for sure. Yeah.
What else are you all working on now?
It always seems like so much. Always like, yeah, like a bunch of little fires burning in different places. I'm looking forward to the partnership with KSUT. And that one, they just actually found out yesterday that got awarded a 3-year grant that will allow us to continue as Dream Warriors doing this work with the communities there. Another year in the Southern Ute tribe, another year in Ute Mountain Ute, and then the 3rd year can be somewhere else. And that will be fun to decide. And then just personally, I'm working on my next book of poetry. It's called When Stars Fall from the Sky. It's about my grandmother, and working on my first album as well. That's really exciting. I have a really talented friend who's my producer and engineer, and he's just phenomenal. And I'll just send him the chords, and then it's just crazy to see what he comes up with. And one song I want to work on actually with Lyla and some of the other members of our little Dream Warrior family. So that one will probably come out before the album, honestly, but I'm excited for that. It's just been really healing to work on music, I feel like, during this whole pandemic. And then Lyla and I have big dreams about creating something in the future too, getting our own piece of land to do programming, to do restoration of the land. To Lyla wants to have sheep on the land. We'll have Indigenous foods and Indigenous garden, do programming, be able to host other artists for retreats, and just keep doing what we're doing, but to have a home base for it. So I feel like that's what I'm cooking in my kitchen, but I'll let Lyla share some of the awesome things she has going on.
My main goal right now is a lot of self-healing and just going inward and trying to, as one of my mentors says, go through my life with a fine-tooth comb and just kind of understand why I do what I do, what are my patterns, what are my blind spots, because I'd really like to live in this life. I'd really like to live according to the truth of just everything. And I think when so much trauma happens in someone's life, it's hard to look at all of it. Some of it's so deeply ingrained in me that I don't even know it's there. So that's kind of my main project right now. But I'm also working on a PhD, which I'm almost done with. And I'm really grateful that I've gotten this far. I'm about 3.5 years into it, and just finished my comprehensive exam. So I just advanced to candidacy. So now I have to write the dissertation element of it. And so I'm working with my committee to get that done. And between that and trying to heal myself, that's about all I can handle right now. So I'm just trying to get those things done as soon as possible so that I could start working a little more fluently in the community and helping out. So yeah, that's sort of what I'm up to. And I also was thinking, like we've shared a lot on this podcast of what the history that Indigenous peoples have gone through and what we're going through today. And I imagine people are asking themselves, like, what can I do? What can we do to sort of be a part of the solution and help? And I think that what we can all do is, number one, if you like to pray, to keep us in your prayers, of course, is important. And number two is to get behind Indigenous-led programs that Native people have already started, who maybe don't have funding or the network or the publicity to fully complete their dreams. But a lot of amazing programs are going on, everything from food sovereignty to language revitalization to elder care to really looking at economic development that's in alignment with our traditional values. There's a lot of them, supporting Two-Spirit youth. There's so many different things that Native people are working on that could use some support. I forgot what the statistic is, but the percentage of philanthropic dollars that goes to Indigenous peoples is atrociously low. It's way lower than the percentage we are of the population of the US. And so, I've really been thinking about funding and where is the funding going and why. And, especially with Black Lives Matter, it's wonderful that more organizations of color are getting visibility. And yet, even in this renaissance of sort of equity that are, I guess it's maybe just a naissance, it's not rebirthing, it's just birthing for the first time in this country, but of equity in all sectors, even then Native people are getting left out. And so even within the communities of color conversation, Indigenous peoples are not really front and center. And that's okay, we all are helping each other's movements, and that's really good. But even still, I see us getting ignored, or even just not even thought about, not thought about in the conversation. Like there'll be a whole diversity, equity, and inclusion training that won't even mention Indigenous peoples. And so just keeping us in mind when we're creating these things. And another thing is land back. If people have land or are working with churches who have, hundreds of acres, or even universities with huge land bases, repatriating land to Indigenous peoples that was stolen. Many tribes are living in Oklahoma right now still as refugees. They haven't been home for 150 years. The Potawatomi, the Peoria tribe, lots of different nations don't have access to their traditional homelands. And so even 10 acres where they could be safe to go and pray and is a good foothold to start building outward from there. So yeah, that's just sort of some ideas of how we can all be a part of the solution. And of course, within the psychology realm, there is so much, juicy stuff that could be done, from, community-based research that's guided by Indigenous peoples, to really letting the Native community lead what the research is and what it's trying to achieve and how to do it properly. To, again, putting more dollars into mental health for Indigenous peoples. So yeah, just thought I'd mention all that.
Yeah, and I can definitely put links to anything in particular that you'd like to link to kind of point people towards. And I think, like you said as well, like bringing spirituality back into it, because so many beliefs that are totally, I don't know, to me essential to being a human are pathologized in psychology, like people talking to their ancestors, like people being very spiritual. It's kind of looked at as like a defense, or something that's like pathological instead of something that's inherently human. Being connected to the land, being connected to your roots, being connected to your ancestry. And now they have a term called transgenerational transmission of trauma that's like getting more popular in psychology. And of course, Indigenous peoples, African people that were brought over as slaves, they talked about this for a long time, and the transgenerational transmission of trauma. And only now are psychology circles kind of recognizing that that's a thing.
Yeah, I'll share a book called Inflamed. It's by Rupa Marya and Raj Patel, and it's medical doctors' take on the effects of colonization on all of us, actually, not just Indigenous peoples, but they talk about inflammation and how stress and inflammation are connected, and how the process of colonization and the process of I want to say like the 1%, how it sort of extracts from a larger community, is leading to inflammation, which is leading to physical health issues. And so they kind of draw this really interesting connection. And she's done all kinds of research looking at, or compiling other research, how Native people who know their traditional language actually have a lower incidence of diabetes rate in that community. So really interesting research that's going on in Canada is showing the correlation between being connected to your roots and physical and mental health. But yeah, I'll share that with folks. She talks about the 3 supremacisms. There's male supremacy, this idea that men are supreme over women. White supremacy, the idea that white folks are supreme over other folks. And then human supremacy, the idea that humans are supreme over other beings in the world. And so, yeah, I'd love to share that book with folks. She's compiled a lot of research and worked pretty hard on this, and it has an interesting thesis.
Perfect. Yes, I'll link to that as well. How did you get into poetry?
For me, I feel like it's been a part of my whole life, like they teach you in school, but I feel like on away games for my team, I was always like coming up with little like rhymes or just like remixing other songs to new songs to just like make people laugh, make the trip more enjoyable. And then for me, during most like more intensely during my senior year in high school, after losing my grandfather in a really traumatic way, and he was very much like a stable like father figure in my life, and just wanting to like drop out of school and then wanting to go back to school because I wanted to go to college still, and had those big dreams of going to Stanford. And when I wanted to go back to school, they wouldn't let me come back initially until I could find a teacher willing to let me back in that late in the semester. They said I couldn't get caught up, even though I was like supposed to be the salutatorian or whatever of my class. So that's some racism for you. But and the only teacher willing to let me in the class was the spoken word teacher, the poetry teacher. And so that's where I just found like this inlet, this outlet that I never knew I needed. I could write about trauma. I could write about encoded language, about things I didn't want people to know. Could write about missing my grandfather. And that's when poetry really became that lifeline. And then going to college with those dreams about what your loved ones want you to be and what you think you want to be. So I was like, I'm going to be this lawyer, but needing to take a full load so I could still have my scholarship. So the person in our dorm sent around like fun classes to take, and poetry was on there. And I was like, poetry was fun then, let me try it now. And that became my lifeline at Stanford, was just a class where I could just express myself and write, even though I was writing very differently, I feel like, from my peers. And then I think it took a year before I was brave enough to say, all right, I'm not going to study political science. I'm going to study English. And then from there, I just kept following the path of poetry, and it's led me some really beautiful places, and to get to work with and reconnect with people like Lyla. It's so funny how I always like forget sometimes that we met at Stanford. And when she says it, it feels like I've lived so many lives since then. I often forget, but I'm grateful, that poetry's brought me to some really good people, and being able to like connect with communities in that way. And sometimes I think I'm not going to write anymore, but it's the thing that, like how Lyla was talking about working on healing and self-care, like that's what poetry is for me, because I have to like silence the external world and get within myself. And so I had avoided writing like poetry for such a long time, and music helped heal, I feel like, other wounds, but poetry is like the deepest parts of me. I had this one professor at Stanford, his name was Lee, and he always talked about poetry like alchemy, like being able to turn things into gold, into other things like in gold, and it has that ability. But he also said poetry was of the dying breath, because it's meant to be read aloud, and every time you're speaking, like it's on an exhale. So it's that poetry is of a dying breath, and it's always this internal life and death. And for me, I feel like that really resonates what poetry is. And it's hard to get to that place sometimes, where it's like you have to silence that voice telling you you're not good enough, or that you don't have anything to say, and then the parts of you that don't want to go back into the wound, because sometimes the source of the wound is the source of the healing, and it's so hard to go back there. But poetry, it allows you to go back there and to rewrite things, or to focus in on a part that you need, like how in EMDR or whatever therapy, like where they tell you to like go back to the moment, what's happening. You're there as your adult self, but poetry is like that too. Like you go back to the wound, you can write what you need to write. You can focus in on a moment that you need to focus in on. And that's something I've always appreciated about poetry.
Thanks for sharing that, sister. Yeah, I was 14 and I went to my first poetry slam. And my friend Coral Bernal, she won first place, hands down. Amazing Indigenous poet. And I was gone. I was a goner. Poetry would be my life pretty much from that day forward. And there was a poetry class in my high school, and they gave varsity poetry and junior varsity poetry, and you got like those letter for your Letterman jacket, and it was like a big deal because Taos, New Mexico, it was very artsy. And I was doing different poetry slams across the country, and that was a very interesting chapter of life. And I think as Native people, slam poetry, back when it was a big thing, it seems to have tapered off, but we have so much to say, we have so much to share, and so much that's been pent up for 500 years that it's a really precious outlet to both speak and to be heard, and then to be recognized. Sometimes winning national slams or state slams, our people have really transmitted our knowledge to the world through this medium. And Tanaya continues to do that with her books and her publications. And it's just really, Joy Harjo is the poet laureate of the United States right now. And she's a Muskogee, I believe Muskogee. And she's, an amazing Indigenous woman who just writes what's in her heart. And the world couldn't help but hear it, and now she's the poet laureate of the whole United States. And she just came out with a book as well, Joy Harjo. It's called Poet Warrior. So, check that out. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it's really good. She's, in Jamaica Osorio from Hawaii, lots of different Indigenous poets throughout the country have sort of come to the fore and use that as a medium to speak what's been dormant for way too long. And so I think it's definitely therapeutic for us and for everyone to start to speak these stories, and not just about the sorrow, but about the beauty of our people, and pass that on to our children.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Lyla June and Tanaya Winder. For more, please follow them on Instagram and visit their websites. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. And now, the song North Star, featuring Quincy Davis, by Lyla June. Streaming on all platforms now. You can see the music video on YouTube. All Bandcamp sales benefit 7th Generation Fund, dedicated to Indigenous peoples' self-determination and the sovereignty of Native nations. Visit lylajune.bandcamp.com. Enjoy.
Oh, my creator, helper of my soul, walk with me on this road, 'cause I can't do it on my own. No, I can't do this alone. These days I walk with an aching in my soul, With you, all I know is all I have to do is ask, and you'll show me the path. Yeah, all I have to do is ask, and you'll show me the path. When I don't got no strength, you lift me up, yeah. And when I can't find my way, you are my North Star, yeah. You the one who rushes in when I cry out to the sky. Step into the field, I can feel the wind. Help me see me through your eyes, so my broken wings can fly. Help me see me through your eyes, so my wings can fly.
Let me fly, ride in the wind I'm on, facing the storm. I know I'ma make it home. All I do is you help me follow the path. Remember the truth, calling us back. All I've been through to be ready for that. All I've been through to be right where I'm at. Living the proof, pick up these pieces, I'm broken and bruised. With infinite reasons, I'm grateful for you. Giving this life and each breath is anew. Finally, I see through the dark at night. Follow your light. Finally, I see myself through your eyes. Finally, I see I can change my life. Change my life. Finally, I see myself through your eyes.
My heart is amazed, but I know that I never walk alone. I know that I'm gonna find my way home. Still some days I want to escape the truth that eats me whole. But with your grace I know I can face it, 'cause you don't let me go. You only love me more. Now you don't let me go. You only love me more. When I am in the storm, you are my anchor. So bring on the storm, you are my anchor. Yeah. Finally, I see myself through your eyes.
Finally, I see I can change my life. Finally, I see myself through your eyes.